All right, let's dive into MDMA today. This one's got a kind of interesting double life, like it makes headlines for being a potential therapy, but then it's also obviously got this whole party drug thing going on. So how does one substance do both? How is it a tool for healing A&D, something you find on the dance floor?
Well, it's really fascinating. Kind of walks a tightrope, you know, being both an empathogen, so it boosts those feelings of empathy and connection, but it's also a psychostimulant, which gives you that energetic party vibe. And yeah, there's all this buzz about it as a treatment, like for PTSD, which we'll get into.
You wanted to understand how it pulls that off, how
Yeah.
it gets those seemingly opposite effects.
Right.
And it really seems to come down to how MDMA interacts with certain brain chemicals, like serotonin, dopamine, and oxytocin, that trifecta of feel-good neurotransmitters. We've got a bunch of clinical research reports on MDMA's effects here, plus some academic papers that analyze its therapeutic uses. We've even got some studies that look at the broader context of psychedelics and mental health.
Yeah, it's like MDMA is this master key, right? It unlocks different pathways in the brain to create those unique effects.
Okay, so let's start breaking down how it works on each of those neurotransmitters.
Yeah.
Let's start with serotonin. Everyone calls it the happy hormone, but I'm guessing it's a bit more complex than that.
Oh, definitely. Think of serotonin as the conductor of your brain's orchestra. It regulates mood, sleep, even appetite. But it really shines in social situations. Serotonin is how we feel empathy, that ability to really understand and share the feelings of others.
So how does MDMA affect our conductor then?
Well, MDMA basically cranks up the volume on serotonin. It does that by doing two main things. First, it reverses the function of something called a serotonin transporter, or SERT for short. Normally, SERT is like a vacuum cleaner, sucking serotonin back into the neuron after it's released. MDMA flips the switch, though, turns SERT into like a leaf blower, blasting serotonin out into the synapse, the space between neurons.
Wow, so instead of cleaning up the serotonin, it's actually pushing more of it out into those communication hubs between brain cells.
Exactly. And more serotonin in the synapse means more signals are being sent, which amplifies those feelings of well-being and connection. This flood of serotonin is really what gives MDMA that distinct empathogenic quality. It's like suddenly you can see the world through someone else's eyes, feel their joy and pain as your own.
That explains why people on MDMA talk about feeling that overwhelming sense of love and connection, like their empathy dial is turned up to 11. But we can't forget dopamine either, right? The reward chemical. Where does that fit into the whole MDMA experience?
Right. Well, dopamine is all about motivation, pleasure, and reward. It's what drives that feeling of wanting something, whether it's a great meal or a social media notification, or in this case, the euphoric effects of MDMA.
So how does MDMA mess with the dopamine system?
MDMA interacts with a protein called VMAT2, which is what packages dopamine into little vesicles, ready to be released. Think of VMAT2 like a tiny postal worker, carefully packing dopamine into envelopes to be delivered to different neurons. But MDMA disrupts that process. It causes dopamine to spill out into the synapse, and that floods the brain with those feel-good signals.
So MDMA is basically throwing a dopamine party in your brain.
Precisely.
And that's where the energy boosts and euphoria come in.
Exactly. That dopamine surge contributes to those stimulant effects. The increased energy, the urge to dance, the heightened senses, like your brain is saying, this feels good, let's do more.
Now, we can't leave out oxytocin, the love hormone. What does it do in the whole MDMA equation?
Yeah, so while it's not as pronounced as serotonin and dopamine, MDMA does bump up oxytocin levels. Oxytocin is all about social bonding, trust, and intimacy. It's that warm, fuzzy feeling you get when you hug someone you love or spend quality time with close friends.
So MDMA is, in a way, amplifying our natural capacity for connection and love?
You could say that. And this might explain why people on MDMA often report feeling a profound sense of connection, not just to friends, but sometimes even to strangers.
Okay, so we've covered the neurochemistry, but I've seen those videos, right? The ones of octopuses seemingly tripping on MDMA. They get more social and touchy-feely. Does that mean those neurochemical systems are similar across different species?
That's an interesting question. It definitely suggests a deeper evolutionary connection. While the effects might be different in different species, the role of those neurotransmitters in social behavior seems to be similar, across a wide range of animals even.
That's crazy. So we're talking about a drug that can change social behavior in humans and the octopuses.
It really highlights how fundamental these neurochemical systems are to social life, even across such wildly different species.
It's like MDMA isn't just a party drug or potential therapy. It's a window into how we connect, like the very essence of it.
And that's what makes it so intriguing, right? It makes us rethink our ideas about consciousness, social behavior, and just the power of these brain chemicals.
This is all fascinating. But is there a downside to messing with such powerful brain systems?
That's a great point, and something we'll definitely discuss in the next part, the potential risks.
Right, so for now, we've laid the groundwork. We know how MDMA, this fascinating molecule, boosts those feelings of empathy and energy, all thanks to its intricate dance with serotonin, dopamine, and oxytocin. But we're just getting started. Stay tuned because in the next part, we'll dig into the potential therapeutic uses of MDMA. We'll explore how this party drug might actually be a game changer in treating things like PTSD.
Welcome back. Ready to explore that more serious side of MDMA?
Absolutely. We talked about how MDMA creates those feel-good effects, boosting serotonin, dopamine, and oxytocin. But like you said, there's this other side, the potential risks. It's like walking a tightrope between the good and the bad.
Yeah, exactly. A tightrope we need to walk carefully. MDMA shows huge promise, especially for therapy. But it's not something to be taken lightly, that's for sure.
So let's talk about those risks. What can actually go wrong when people use MDMA?
Well, one of the more immediate risks is a bad trip. Even though MDMA is usually associated with positive feelings, some people end up experiencing, anxiety, paranoia, even panic attacks.
Yeah, I can see how that might happen, especially since MDMA makes you so emotionally vulnerable. So if someone's already dealing with anxiety or other mental health stuff, it could make it worse.
Right. It's like it shines a spotlight on those vulnerabilities you already have, which is why screening and responsible use are so important. Not everyone is a good fit for MDMA, even in a therapeutic setting.
So it's not just popping a pill and hoping for the best.
Definitely not. There's a reason why most of the promising research uses trained therapists and a controlled environment.
Makes sense.
Yeah.
Another risk I've heard about is hyperthermia or overheating. Is that something to be concerned about?
Oh, yeah. It's a very real concern. And it can be dangerous. MDMA can interfere with how your body regulates temperature. And if you combine that with physical activity, like dancing for hours in a hot club, things can get out of hand really quickly.
So MDMA plus a rave equals a recipe for overheating.
Pretty much, yeah. And in severe cases, hyperthermia can even lead to organ damage or even death. That's one of the reasons harm reduction strategies are so important, like staying hydrated and taking breaks to cool down.
Staying safe is key. What about long-term effects? Does frequent MDMA use have any lasting consequences?
That's where it gets a bit tricky. There's research that suggests chronic, heavy MDMA use can change the brain, especially the serotonin system.
So messing with that serotonin conductor long-term, basically, what kind of changes are we talking about?
Well, some studies have shown that people who use MDMA a lot might end up with problems in how their serotonin functions, which could show up as mood swings, trouble sleeping, even problems with thinking clearly.
That sounds pretty serious. Is the damage permanent?
We don't know for sure yet. The research is ongoing. It's not clear how long these changes actually last. Some studies suggest that serotonin function can recover over time, if you stop using MDMA, of course. But we need more research to really understand the long-term risks.
It seems like there's still a lot we don't know about MDMA's long-term effects. But responsible use is definitely important, right?
Absolutely. It's all about weighing the potential benefits against the risks. And when it comes to therapy, the goal is to really maximize those benefits while keeping the risks as low as possible.
Okay, so we've covered some of the potential downsides of MDMA. Now let's switch gears and talk about its potential as a therapy. You mentioned earlier that it shows promise for treating PTSD. Can you tell us more about that?
Oh, the research on MDMA-assisted psychotherapy for PTSD has been groundbreaking, to say the least. It's not just about hiding the symptoms. It seems to actually help people heal and recover.
That's incredible. How does that work? What's the secret behind MDMA-assisted therapy?
Well, there are a few key things going on. First, MDMA's ability to boost serotonin and oxytocin creates this sense of safety, trust, and emotional openness. This lets people revisit traumatic memories without being completely overwhelmed by fear and anxiety.
So it's like MDMA creates this safe space to deal with trauma.
Exactly. It takes the edge off that fear response, allowing people to access and process those painful memories, but in a more controlled way.
And the therapist helps guide them through that.
Right. The therapist is crucial. They help people make sense of their experiences and integrate those memories in a healthy way.
I imagine the extra empathy from MDMA helps with the bond between the person and the therapist too, right?
Yeah, you're right. That stronger connection allows for more trust and a better therapeutic relationship, which is essential for successful therapy.
This all sounds super promising, but what kind of results are we actually seeing in these studies?
The best evidence comes from phase 3 trials, done by the Multidisciplinary Association for Psychedelic Studies, or MAPS. These trials looked at people with really severe treatment-resistant PTSD.
So these are people who haven't gotten better with traditional therapies.
Exactly. And the results were amazing. A lot of the participants who got MDMA-assisted psychotherapy had a huge reduction in their PTSD symptoms. And these improvements lasted for months after the treatment.
That's incredible. It sounds like MDMA could be a total game changer for people who have been struggling with PTSD for years.
It has that potential for sure. And it's not just anecdotal, it's based on real scientific research.
But MDMA is still illegal most places, right? How is this research even happening?
Well, MAPS has been really important in pushing for MDMA research. They got special permission from regulatory agencies to do these clinical trials.
So they're leading the way for a new kind of psychedelic medicine.
They are, and the results they're getting are hard to ignore. It's forcing the medical world to rethink how we treat mental health.
It's crazy to think that something once seen as a dangerous party drug could hold the key to healing trauma. It really changes how we think about medicine.
It does, and it shows how important scientific research is, and keeping an open mind.
We've covered a lot here, from the potential risks of MDMA to its amazing therapeutic potential. It's clear that MDMA is complicated, with a whole range of effects. But what I find fascinating is how it seems to target that core part of being human, our ability to connect with others.
I think you've hit the nail on the head. Whether it's used recreationally to boost social experiences, or therapeutically to heal trauma, MDMA's effects on social bonding and empathy are really at the heart of it all.
So where do we go from here? What's the takeaway for our listeners?
That's a great question, and one we'll definitely dig into in the final part of our deep dive. We'll explore what this research might mean, the ethics of using MDMA, and what the future might hold for psychedelic medicine.
Sounds like we've got even more fascinating stuff to explore. Stay tuned for the final part where we'll put it all together and discuss the bigger implications of this groundbreaking research. We're back for the final part of our MDMA deep dive. We've gone through the neurochemistry, the risks, the therapeutic potential. What a journey, right?
Yeah, definitely. And now I get to zoom out a bit. Look at the bigger picture, What does all of this mean for the future of MDMA? For how we treat mental health? Maybe even for, society in general?
Yeah, exactly. I mean, we saw how MDMA can help people heal from trauma, but could it be useful outside of therapy too?
That's a really interesting question, and it's one that researchers and ethicists are thinking about a lot. You see, MDMA doesn't just change how we feel, it changes how we interact with each other, too. That empathy boost, the connection, it goes beyond just the individual.
So you're saying it could have an impact on, social dynamics? Could it help with relationships or even conflict resolution?
There's definitely potential there. Think about it. If MDMA can help people with PTSD open up and process trauma, couldn't it also help people in everyday life communicate better? Maybe break down those barriers and build stronger bonds?
It's like MDMA could be a social lubricant, but in a much deeper way than, say, alcohol. But wouldn't that be risky? Kind of like opening Pandora's box.
Yeah, and that's where the ethical considerations come in. We're dealing with a powerful substance here, one that can really influence our thoughts, our feelings, our actions. We have to be extremely careful with how it's used and who has access to it.
It's still illegal in most places, right?
Yeah.
So even if the research keeps showing positive results, how do we bridge that gap between the science and the law?
That's a tough one. We need to have these open, honest conversations about MDMA. About the potential benefits and the risks, not just among scientists and policymakers, but also within communities.
That's where education and responsible use are so important. Right?
Absolutely. We can't just say, okay, everyone, MDMA is available.
What?
We need to be thoughtful, careful, focusing on harm reduction and making sure people are informed.
Okay, that makes sense. We've talked about MDMA for PTSD, but I also saw some stuff about its potential for other things, like anxiety and depression. Is there anything to that?
Well, the research is still pretty new, but there are some promising studies looking into those uses. For example, there's research on MDMA-assisted therapy for social anxiety in adults with autism.
Wow, that's amazing. I can see how MDMA could be helpful for people on the autism spectrum, especially with its ability to reduce those social inhibitions and create those feelings of connection.
Exactly. And there's also research looking at MDMA in couples therapy, helping partners communicate more openly and work through their issues.
It's like we're only just starting to understand what MDMA can do. It's exciting, but also a little bit scary, isn't it?
It is. We're in uncharted territory here, but that's what makes it so fascinating. We're pushing the boundaries of what we know about the human mind, exploring new ways to heal and connect.
This whole deep dive has been eye-opening, really. We started with this molecule, MDMA, and ended up talking about brain chemistry, mental health, even the nature of connection itself. It's mind-blowing.
It really is, and it shows just how connected all of these things are. Our brains, our emotions, our relationships, it's all part of this intricate web, and MDMA, in its own way, helps us unravel some of those threads.
So where do we go from here? What should our listeners take away from all of this?
I think the most important thing to remember is MDMA is a powerful tool, but it's not a magic solution. It needs careful consideration, responsible use, and more research.
And an open mind, right?
Oh, absolutely. The future of MDMA and psychedelic medicine in general depends on us being willing to have these open, honest conversations about both the good and the bad. It's about finding that balance between caution and curiosity, skepticism and hope.
You've definitely given our listeners a lot to think about.
Yeah, I hope so. Just remember, keep asking questions, stay informed, and don't be afraid to challenge your own assumptions. The world of psychedelic science is full of surprises. There's so much more to discover.
And on that note, we'll leave you to ponder all the possibilities. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive into the world of MDMA. Until next time, keep exploring.